Welcome to Speducation, and I am your host, Brandon Reed. If this is your first time here, thank you and welcome. Today we're going to be diving back into the different parts of an IEP. Last week we talked a little bit about the beginnings of the IEP and the first couple of sections. Today we're going to focus on two main sections. The first is the special considerations, and then the second is going to be the transition piece. So without further ado, let's dive into today's lesson. Today's lesson is over parts of an IEP, week 2. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we're going to be covering today. So today we're going to look at special considerations section, okay? And we're going to talk a little bit about what special considerations are. Then we're going to move on to the transition section, which, depending on the age of the student, you may or may not necessarily need this section of the IEP, but we're still going to cover it in case your child has a need for this section. So without any more delay, let's do this thing. So special consideration, okay, language impairment. What does that mean? Well, basically what that means is that we're not talking about language as in a language impairment such as speech and language. We're talking about language as in a foreign language, okay? So when you see your IEP, you may see this where it says, does the student have needs related to limited English proficiency? That means, is their English limited? Okay. I mean, I know that kind of sounds, weird saying that, but, do they speak another language other than English? And do they understand English enough to receive support? If the answer is yes, then you don't need to worry about that. Okay. If the answer is no, okay, does the student have needs related to English proficiency? Then you don't necessarily have to worry. But if they do have disabilities or needs related, then you will need to fill out this section. So if you mark yes, then you have to fill it out. If you mark no, then you can move past it, okay? If the answer is yes, then you need to describe what the student's needs are. Maybe they need an interpreter. Maybe they need somebody to explain to them how to do something, okay? I once had a student that was from Saudi Arabia, and so the only language they spoke was Farsi. And so we had to schedule that student with another student who spoke Farsi so that they could communicate and so that the other student could translate for this student. So maybe they need more visuals because they don't speak the language. This is where you would put that information. The other sections are more geared towards deaf and hard of hearing or blind and low vision students, okay? It's very rare that you will have any students, if you are a special ed teacher, with this. However, it does happen, okay? So if you mark yes to this, then you'll need to fill out, describe the student's language and communication needs, such as if they're deaf or hard of hearing, they may need sign language. If they're blind or low vision, they may need, specialized equipment that will make the wording bigger so that they can see it, or they may need Braille, okay? Especially for the bottom, okay? Any student with blind or low vision. If you select yes for that, then you need to describe the considerations regarding Braille, okay? What specifically is it that they will need Braille for? And that's what this section is. The next section is behavior. So in this section, we're talking about behavior concerns, okay? If the student, your child, has a behavior concern, then we would mark yes. If the child does not have a behavior concern, then we would mark no, and we would move on to the next section. However, if the child does have a behavior of issue or of concern, then we would describe what the behavior is. And just because they have a behavior of concern doesn't necessarily mean that they need a behavior plan. However, the majority of the time, if there is a behavior of concern, then we need to fill out some sort of behavior plan to kind of curb that behavior so that it doesn't impede their learning. Now, If the behavior of concern does impede their learning, we would mark yes. If it doesn't, we would mark no. But then we would have to explain why it is that we would have to explain why this behavior is not of concern. Okay, so in that case, we have to have documentation of that, because if we say, yes, they have a behavior of concern, but it doesn't impede the learning of other students or of themselves, and the student is constantly getting in trouble or constantly disrupting the class, and we go back here and we say, wait a second, they have a behavior of concern. How is this not impeding their learning or the learning of others? We have documentation that says that. So if we determine that the behavior of concern does impede their learning and the learning of others, then we would go to this page. And this page, it has CCC determination. Well, if you're wondering what CCC stands for, it stands for Case Conference Committee. And based upon the behavior, we need to determine, is a functional behavior assessment needed? Okay. If we can provide services and supports that curb the behavior without having to do an FBA, then we'll do that. And we'll just mark no. Okay. It's not recommended. Okay. However, if the behavior of concern is impeding his learning, and that the supports and the supports that we're providing to the students are not helping him, then we might have to do an FBA, a functional behavior assessment. And we'll get into how you do an FBA and what entails that, but not today. So as you can see, if you don't need an FBA, then you're done with this section and you move on. If you do need an FBA, then we need to answer some questions, such as a functional behavior assessment has been completed. If we do an FBA and it's been completed, then we're going to mark this, and we're going to put the findings of that assessment in here. If a functional behavior assessment has already been done, but we find that we need to update it or we need to revisit it to add more information, then we would click a review of the existing functional behavior assessment is needed. So it means one is already done, but we just need to revisit it because maybe there's more problems that we're just not aware of. Transitions. So the transition section is not for everybody. It's really age appropriate. So if your child is between the ages of 1 and 12, they don't need this. But the minute they turn 13, we have to do what's called a transition assessment. And that's where we basically ask them questions about what do they consider to be their strengths and weaknesses? What do they like to do? Okay, what are some of the issues that they have with school? And by asking these questions, it helps us narrow down the type of career that they might be interested in the future. We also do this to determine whether or not they have sufficient skills for independent living, because even though they're 13, one day they may be living on their own. So we might ask them questions such as, can you take showers on your own? Can you dress yourself? Can you make simple meals for yourself? Do you know what to do in case of an emergency? Asking these simple questions gives us kind of insight as to whether or not they can live independently. It doesn't mean that they will. It just means that they have the skills necessary to live independently if they have to. And we do this once a year. So every year we update it. However, if the answer to this is no, there is no evidence to show that they can live independently, then there are more sections that we need to fill out, such as developing goals to help them develop those independent living skills. Down here, it says, if no regarding independent living skills after high school, I will, and that's the other section that we do. However, we do talk about employment. We do talk about training, okay? So if the answer is yes, and there is sufficient skills and they can live independently, then what do they plan to do after high school? Are they going to go to college? Are they going to go to a vocational school? What kind of job do they want to get? Generally, we ask this question to 13-year-olds and they're not sure. But by the time they get to high school, they have a pretty good idea of what they want to do. And that brings us to the end of today's lesson. hopefully you learned a lot. Hopefully you were able to get a better understanding of what the special consideration section of the IEP is, as well as the transition section. Next week, we're going to talk about accommodations and what kind of accommodations you might get for your classroom and for state testing. And then we'll also talk about the goals section, okay? What goes into a goal and how do we write them? If you liked this video, please click the like button. And if you want updates on future videos, feel free to click the subscribe button and ring the bell for updates on future videos. And as always, if you have questions, feel free to post them and your comments in the comments section, and I'll try to address those next time. Until next time, class dismissed.